You've asked, we have responded. Today, we are going to finally dive deep into the difference in tuning between 5, 6, 8, 10, 23 lug drums, all of it. Over the course of the years here tuning an awful lot of different drums, we've discovered that there were a fair amount of variables that we thought would really affect the tuning process on snare drums in particular that turned out to not have as big of an effect as we thought. But probably the most surprising one out of all of these was how many lugs the drum has. Now, let me slow you down before you smash the thumbs down button and run off to go watch what Island Mr. Beast is giving away today. Let's stop and analyze this for a second. When we talk about tuning, something that does not get talked about enough is the expectations of the capability of the drum that's in front of us, which the amount of lugs on the drum does affect. It's true, the amount of lugs on the drum is going to affect the sound that you end up with. It may affect the tuning range that sounds good of that particular drum. But in terms of it having to do with difficulty of tuning the instrument or the idea that 6 is worse than 10, that is absolute nonsense. This even goes for those spooky Gretsch rack toms that have 5 lugs. What do we do if there isn't a lug opposite every other lug? How can we possibly get this drum in tune with itself? The bottom line here is that we have to be thinking in terms of what a drum is capable of, both in terms of sound and in terms of the sound that we're looking for before we judge its capacity to be easily tunable. We're going to get to specific expectations and possibilities around certain lug counts a little bit later in the video. But before we get into that, circling back to some other videos we've made in the past, we always want to drive home the idea of very small, even incremental adjustments on any drum at any time when you're getting the thing in tune with itself. The way that this is going to feel to you on a 6 lug drum versus a 10 or a 12 lug drum is going to be different. And this is where things can start to seem like there were some smoke and mirrors going on that make the 6 weird or make the 12 weird or make the 8 easier than the rest or something like that. This resolution in the tuning, which is to say how much effect you have over a given amount of turns, is going to be different if you have 12 lugs than if you have 8 or 6 or 10. And if you've only ever had one drum in your life with a single lug count and you're very comfortable with that, moving to a different count is going to behave differently. This is where it can start to seem like it's difficult because you're used to another one. But the fact of the matter is, it's just new information and another facet of tuning that you're going to have to spend a little bit of time with, and also set aside your instincts and expectations just a little bit, because each drum is slightly different, and if there are less lugs, even more so. When we sit down to tune a drum, regardless of which one it is on the kit, we're essentially doing the same thing every time. We're tightening screws to apply pressure to a metal or wooden rim that is stretching a drum head onto the drum, slowly raising the tension and by virtue of that raising the pitch. Where things start to get a little bit different is if we have 6 lugs, we have less nodes of pressure than with a 10 lug drum. And that means that if we have a destination pitch, we are going to have to tune the 6 a lot tighter at each node because there are less of them that are collectively generating the pressure to get us up to where we're trying to go. Put simply, the less lugs your drum has, the more turns each of them is going to require to get that head to the same pitch as a drum with a higher lug count. This is the only variable affecting getting us to the tension that we're looking for. Less lugs, more turns. That's it. If you're enjoying what you see here on Sounds Like a Drum, the main way to help us continue to do this is to follow the link below to our Patreon and help finance the show, because that's one of the ways that we are able to continue to make these videos, post every week. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Follow the link below, check it out. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, here's where things start to get exciting. If we're using drums with different lug counts, there are perils and possibilities in every single version of this. And the one that jumps to mind for me is that less lug counts means that at a given amount of pressure, you have a lower sound, which means if you want a lower tuned drum and you don't want to, for instance, worry about any of the screws backing out because they're under so little tension, moving to a lower lug count is going to get you a really great lower sound without having to worry about that. Really pitching up a 10 lug drum or even an 8, but particularly a 10, is going to get you incredibly even tuning around the entire head, and you're not going to have to crank that thing to the point of maybe worrying about the structure of your lugs to get it up into that super high tuning range. All the more reason why oftentimes when we go after really high pitched sounds here, we don't necessarily go for a smaller drum, but we'll go for a standard size drum with a higher lug count, because at the end of the day, that gets a really cracking sound, but with a little more body than a smaller drum. Just to reiterate, if we're cranking up a 10 lug drum versus a 6, we don't have to have as much tension on each of the lug locations because we have so many more of them. So there's less stress on the lugs, and we don't have to worry about really reaching for the limits of what that drum is capable of in terms of tension. We are certain that there are some people watching right now that are more of the idea that they don't listen so much to the pitch of the drum or the tension and more go by feel with the drum key. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but this is another spot where if you're moving from less lugs to more or vice versa, the feel is going to change because, again, to get into the range that you're aiming for, whatever it may be, if you have less lugs than you're used to, it's going to take a lot more tension to get it up there. And on the other hand, if you are used to less and you're going to a 10 or a 12 lug drum, you're going to need a lot less pressure at each lug to get you to that same range. To help ensure that you have the easiest, funnest time going through this process, regardless of how many lugs your drum has, remember these things. Number one, let's get some fresh heads on there if at all possible. If not, that's okay too. Number two, let's use 2 drum keys on opposing lugs to give us the most even experience as we move around the instrument. And lastly, please go in small increments and listen along the way, because even if you feel like you know how you want the drum to sound when you sat down, you might find something even cooler along the way, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to miss that.